July 1944, Normandy, France. The ground shook as shells exploded across the open fields. Canadian soldiers crouched behind their tanks, waiting for the order to advance. In front of them lay 500 yards of open farmland. On the other side, German machine guns waited in concrete bunkers. Lieutenant General Guy Simonds watched through his binoculars as another wave of infantry charged across that deadly gap. He counted the seconds: 20 yards, 50 yards. Then the German guns opened fire. Men fell like wheat before a scythe. Those who made it to the German lines were too exhausted and too few to fight. This was the third attack that week. This was the third failure. The numbers told a horrible story. In just 1 month, 12,000 Canadian and British soldiers had been killed or wounded. 7 out of every 10 men who charged across open ground became casualties. The tanks could get close to the enemy positions. Their thick armor kept them safe from bullets and small shells. But tanks fought alone. The infantry had to follow on foot. And in that final stretch between where the tanks stopped and where the fighting began, men died by the hundreds every single day. Simonds had watched generals argue about the problem for weeks. They sent more men. They used more artillery. They tried night attacks. Nothing worked. The pattern never changed. Tanks advanced. Infantry followed. Men died in the open ground. It was the way war had always been fought. Simonds was not like most generals. As a Canadian officer commanding troops in a British-dominated command structure, he had learned to think independently. He had not spent his career in the safety of headquarters. He had led men in battle. He had crawled through mud and heard bullets snap past his head. He was 41 years old, young for his rank. Some officers called him too bold. Others said he asked too many questions. But his superiors noticed something else. He won battles. He saved lives. He found ways to solve problems that others said could not be solved. Now he faced a problem that seemed impossible. How do you keep men alive when they must cross open ground under machine gun fire? The British commanders had their answer. Send more men, use more tanks, follow the doctrine. That was the word they used again and again. Doctrine, the rule book of war. Tanks were meant to fight other tanks. Infantry was meant to follow and capture ground. That was how it had always been done. That was how it would always be done. When Simonds suggested putting infantry inside tanks, the response was immediate. A British colonel looked at him like he had suggested soldiers should fly. Tanks fight, the colonel said slowly, as if speaking to a child. Infantry follows. That is doctrine. Another officer shook his head. It has never been done. Therefore, it cannot work. Simonds walked through the repair yards that afternoon. Around him sat dozens of damaged tanks. Some had broken tracks. Others had damaged engines or blown turrets. Mechanics worked on a few. Most just sat there, waiting. The army called them scrap. They would be stripped for parts or left to rust. Simonds stopped in front of a Canadian ram tank. The turret had been destroyed by a German shell. The gun was gone, but the hull looked solid. The armor was intact. The engine probably still worked. He thought about the men he had watched die that morning. He thought about the 500 yards of open ground. He thought about the tanks that could cross that ground safely while men could not. What if the answer was not building something new? What if everything they needed was already here, sitting in this yard, labeled as worthless junk? Simonds climbed onto the damaged ram tank. He looked inside the turret hole. The interior was spacious. More space than he expected. You could fit 10 men in there if you removed the gun and ammunition racks. Maybe 12. He jumped down and walked to another damaged tank, then another, each one the same. Wasted space inside, armor on the outside. Protection that could save lives, sitting unused while men died crossing open ground on foot. That evening, Simonds presented his idea to the senior officers. Use the damaged tanks, remove the turrets, remove the guns, gut the insides, put benches along the walls, drive infantry right up to the enemy positions inside armored protection. Let them out fresh and ready to fight instead of exhausted and dying. The room went silent. Then the objections began. These vehicles were not designed for that purpose, an engineer said. The doctrine is clear, a British general added. Tanks support infantry. They do not carry infantry. A colonel pointed out that no army in the world used such a vehicle. If it was a good idea, someone would have tried it already, he said. The meeting ended with nothing decided. The generals would discuss it further. They would review the proposal. They would consider the implications for doctrine. Simonds left the meeting and walked back to the repair yard. The sun was setting. Long shadows stretched across the damaged tanks. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. Tomorrow, more men would be ordered to cross more open ground. More would die. The generals would discuss. The doctrine would remain unchanged, and the scrap vehicles would continue to sit here, unused. He placed his hand on the cold armor of a ram tank. The metal was thick, solid, strong enough to stop bullets, strong enough to save lives. They did not need to build something new. They did not need to wait for factories to design and produce a solution. Everything they needed was right here. Old tanks, damaged vehicles, equipment everyone else called worthless. What if worthless equipment could save thousands of lives? What if the best innovation was not creating something new, but seeing something old in a completely different way? Simonds did not wait for permission. The next morning, he walked into the field workshop where mechanics repaired damaged vehicles. The air smelled of oil and metal. Sparks flew from welding torches. He found the chief mechanic, a sergeant named Bill Harris, who had fixed tanks since the war began. Simonds pointed to a damaged ram tank sitting in the corner. "I need you to do something that has never been done before," he said. Harris listened as Simonds explained the plan. "Remove the turret completely. Cut away the gun mounting. Strip out all the ammunition racks and firing controls. Weld metal benches along both sides of the interior. Make room for 10 fully equipped soldiers. Do it in 72 hours." Harris walked around the ram tank twice. He measured the interior space with a tape measure. He calculated in his head. "The turret ring is 140 centimeters wide," he said. "Once we remove the turret, that is just an open hole. We need to cover it, or men inside will be exposed." Simonds nodded. "Use the turret armor itself. Cut it into plates and weld them over the opening. Leave a few hatches so men can see out and get fresh air." Harris measured again. "Interior length is 4 meters. Width at the benches will be 1.8 meters. We can fit 12 men if we keep the benches narrow, 20 centimeters wide for each bench." He paused. "The armor on this ROM is 12 millimeters on the sides, 110 millimeters on the front. That will stop rifle bullets and shell fragments. Most machine gun fire too." The work began immediately. 3 mechanics used cutting torches to remove the turret. The metal glowed orange as the flames cut through. It took 6 hours to separate the turret from the hull. They used a crane to lift it away. Simonds watched as the interior of the tank opened up. It looked huge without the gun and turret taking up space. 2 mechanics climbed inside and started removing everything that was not needed. Ammunition racks, gun controls, radio equipment that took up too much room. They worked through the night. By morning, the interior was empty except for the driver's compartment. Welders came next. They cut pieces from the old turret and welded them into flat plates. These plates covered the turret opening. They left 3 hatches that could open and close. Fresh air and light could come in. Soldiers could look out, but the men inside would still have armor protection overhead. Building the benches took the most time. Harris wanted them strong enough to hold 12 men with full equipment. Each soldier carried a rifle, ammunition, grenades, and a pack. About 40 kilograms per man. The benches had to support nearly 500 kilograms total. They used steel angle iron welded to the hull walls. Wooden boards went on top for the actual seats. By the 3rd day, the first conversion was complete. The vehicle looked strange. It still had the thick armor and tracks of a tank. But the turret was gone. The top was flat, with 3 hatches. Simonds climbed inside. The benches ran along both walls. There was room to sit 12 men comfortably. He checked the measurements himself. The armor was intact, 12 millimeters on the sides, 110 millimeters on the front. The engine still worked. Top speed was 25 miles per hour, slower than a regular tank, but fast enough. But Simonds faced a problem. The generals had not approved his idea. Officially, he had no authority to test it in real combat. Using an unauthorized vehicle in battle could end his career. He needed someone willing to take that risk with him. He found that person in Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Wotherspoon. Wotherspoon commanded an armored regiment. He had lost too many friends watching infantry die in open ground. When Simonds showed him the converted vehicle, Wotherspoon walked around it slowly. He climbed inside. He sat on the benches. He knocked on the armor with his fist. "When do we test it?" he asked. Simonds told him about Operation Totalize, a major attack planned for August 8th. Wotherspoon smiled. "I will use it in the attack. If it fails, we both face court-martial. If it works, we save lives." August 8th, 1944. The attack began before dawn. Wotherspoon loaded 12 infantrymen into the converted ram tank. The men climbed through the hatches and sat on the benches. The hatches closed. The engine roared to life. The vehicle rolled forward into the darkness. Machine gun bullets hit the armor and bounced off. The men inside heard the impacts, but stayed safe. The vehicle crossed the 500 yards of open ground in 10 minutes. 10 minutes, instead of 3 hours of crawling and dying. It stopped near the German positions. The hatches opened. 12 soldiers jumped out. They were not wounded. They were not exhausted. They were ready to fight. The results shocked everyone. In previous attacks, 70 out of every 100 men became casualties crossing open ground. In this attack, only 15 out of every 100 were hit. Most of those casualties happened after the soldiers left the vehicle, during the actual fighting. The approach itself was almost bloodless. Word spread through the Canadian units like wildfire. Soldiers who saw the converted vehicle wanted one immediately. Officers who had criticized the idea now demanded it. Within 24 hours, Simonds received orders to convert every damaged tank available. The field workshops worked around the clock. More mechanics were brought in. More damaged vehicles were found. Canadian ram tanks, American M7 Priest self-propelled guns that had their big guns removed, British tanks with blown turrets. Every vehicle that had armor but no working weapons became a candidate for conversion. The mechanics developed a system. Each conversion took 18 hours instead of 72. Remove turret. Strip interior. Weld benches. Cover the top. Done. They completed 76 conversions in 10 days. Each vehicle received a name. The soldiers started calling them kangaroos because they carried troops like a mother kangaroo carries babies in her pouch. The British saw the results and immediately wanted kangaroos for their units. The Americans sent observers to study the design. Everyone wanted to copy the idea. Simonds had not invented new technology. He had not discovered new armor or engines. He had simply looked at equipment everyone called worthless and saw its potential. He had taken the armor meant to protect a gun and used it to protect people instead. By the end of August, 300 kangaroos were in service. Every major attack now included them. Casualty rates dropped across the entire front. Soldiers who rode in kangaroos arrived at battle fresh instead of exhausted. They fought better. They survived more. The skeptics became believers. The doctrine changed. And it all started with one unauthorized test and 2 officers willing to risk everything on an idea everyone else said could never work. The numbers told a story that changed military thinking forever. Before the kangaroos, attacking across open ground meant 3 hours of crawling under constant fire. Soldiers moved from crater to crater. They dragged wounded friends. They watched men fall around them. By the time a unit reached the enemy positions, most men were either dead, wounded, or too exhausted to fight effectively. A company of 120 men might arrive with only 40 able to continue. Those 40 were breathing hard. Their hands shook. Their ammunition was half gone. They faced fresh enemy troops and prepared defenses. The math was simple and brutal. Every attack cost more men than it gained ground. After the kangaroos, everything changed. The same journey across the same 500 yards now took 10 minutes. Soldiers sat inside armor protection. Bullets hit the outside and bounced away. Shell fragments pinged off the metal but did not penetrate. The men inside stayed dry when it rained. They were not exhausted when they arrived. A company of 120 men reached the objective with 102 still combat ready. 85% combat strength instead of 30%. Those men jumped out of the kangaroos, ready to fight immediately. Their ammunition was full, their nerves were steady. The enemy faced fresh troops appearing suddenly at close range. The difference was not small. It was the difference between failure and success. Between death and survival. The British and American armies watched these results with growing amazement. They had tried other solutions to the same problem. The Americans experimented with heavily armored trucks. Thick steel plates were welded to regular supply trucks. The idea was sound, but the execution failed. The trucks were slow. The armor made them tip over easily. The engines could not handle the extra weight. They broke down constantly. Mechanics spent more time fixing trucks than soldiers spent using them. The British tried a different approach. They used more artillery to destroy enemy positions before infantry advanced. They fired 10 times more shells than before. The ground was torn apart. Craters overlapped craters, but German soldiers hid in deep bunkers. When the artillery stopped, they came out and set up their machine guns again. The British infantry still had to cross open ground. The casualties still piled up. The Kangaroos succeeded where these alternatives failed because they solved the actual problem. The problem was not destroying the enemy. The problem was getting soldiers across open ground, alive and ready to fight. The Kangaroos did exactly that. Nothing more. Nothing less. By September 1944, every Allied commander in France wanted Kangaroos. Production increased from 76 vehicles to over 300. Field workshops converted every available damaged tank. Canadian Rams, American Priests, British Churchills with destroyed turrets. Even captured German tanks were converted. If it had armor and an engine, it could become a Kangaroo. Each vehicle carried its load of 12 soldiers across countless battlefields. The sight became common. Infantry units refused to attack without them. But the Germans noticed too. At first, they were confused. Enemy vehicles approached but did not fire. German gunners aimed at them, but the vehicles kept coming. Then soldiers poured out at close range. German commanders studied captured Kangaroos. They analyzed the tactic. They adapted. New orders went to German anti-tank gun crews. Previously, these crews focused on destroying tanks with working guns. Those were the dangerous targets. Now the orders changed. Target the Kangaroos first. Stop the infantry carriers before they reach our lines. German PaK-40 anti-tank guns received priority placement to cover approach routes. The guns were powerful. They could punch through the Kangaroo's armor at close range. German gunners learned to aim for the front where the doors were. A direct hit would kill everyone inside. The Allies adapted in turn. Kangaroos no longer advanced alone. They traveled in groups, with regular tanks providing cover. Smoke shells hid their approach. Artillery destroyed known anti-tank gun positions before attacks began. The tactics evolved week by week. The Germans tried harder to stop the Kangaroos. The Allies tried harder to protect them. This pattern proved the Kangaroo's importance. The Germans understood what many Allied officers had initially missed. These unarmed vehicles were more dangerous than many armed tanks. They delivered fresh troops to the fight. They changed the mathematics of battle. One example showed the wider impact clearly. In October 1944, Canadian forces attacked the German-held port of Antwerp in Belgium. The approach to the city required crossing 2 miles of flat farmland. No cover, no trees, just open fields and German machine guns. Before Kangaroos, such an attack would have been suicide. The commanders would have waited for better conditions or chosen a different objective. With Kangaroos, the attack proceeded. 150 Kangaroos carried 1,800 men across those 2 miles. German bullets hammered the armor for 20 minutes. The vehicles kept moving. 267 men were casualties. Most were hit after leaving the Kangaroos during the actual fighting. 1,533 men reached the German positions ready for combat. The city fell in 3 days. Before Kangaroos, military planners estimated it would take 3 weeks and cost 8,000 casualties. British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery saw these results personally. He visited a Kangaroo unit in late September. He watched as crews loaded infantry and drove toward German lines. He saw the soldiers dismount unharmed. After the battle, Montgomery wrote in his official report that the Kangaroo was simple brilliance that saved thousands of lives. He ordered British workshops to begin their own conversions immediately. American General Omar Bradley visited soon after. He made similar orders for American forces. What began as one Canadian officer's unauthorized experiment became standard practice for 3 armies in 3 months. The Kangaroo earned its place in history as the world's first true armored personnel carrier, a vehicle designed solely to protect and transport infantry under fire. By November 1944, over 300 Kangaroos operated across the Western Front. They participated in every major battle: the Rhine River crossings, the advance into Germany, the final push to Berlin. Each operation saw fewer casualties than predicted. Soldiers who had expected to die survived. Units maintained combat strength through multiple battles. The statistics were clear and undeniable. Divisions using kangaroos suffered 40% fewer casualties than divisions attacking the same objectives without them. 40%. Thousands of men who would have died went home to their families instead. The official recognition came in many forms. Simonds received promotion to command all Canadian forces in Europe. The Kangaroo became standard equipment in Allied doctrine manuals. Future attack plans automatically included Kangaroo requirements. The British produced their own versions. The Americans designed new models. But all of them traced back to that first converted ram tank in a French repair yard. All of them came from one man seeing potential in equipment others called worthless. The scale of implementation told the story. 300 vehicles, thousands of missions, tens of thousands of soldiers delivered safely to battle. And it all started because someone asked a simple question. What if we stopped using armor only to protect guns and started using it to protect people instead? The war ended in May 1945. The Kangaroos had done their job. They sat in fields across Europe, battered and worn. Some had bullet holes in the armor, others had broken tracks. Most were simply tired from 2 years of constant use. The military faced a question it always faced after wars. What do we keep? What do we throw away? Many weapons went to scrapyards. New technology replaced old designs. But the Kangaroo did not disappear. Military planners looked at the casualty statistics from the last year of war. They saw the proof in clear numbers. Protected transport, saved lives. It won battles. It changed what armies could accomplish. The Kangaroo itself was retired. Those specific vehicles were old and damaged, but the idea behind them survived and grew. By 1950, during the Korean War, American engineers designed a new vehicle based on the Kangaroo concept. They called it the M75. It was built from scratch as a troop carrier, not converted from old tanks. The armor was thicker, the engine was more powerful, it could carry more soldiers, but the basic idea remained the same. Put infantry inside armor, drive them to the battle, let them out fresh and protected. The M75 was too expensive to build in large numbers, so engineers designed a simpler version called the M113. This vehicle first rolled off assembly lines in 1960. It weighed 11 tons. Its aluminum armor was 28 millimeters thick at the front. It could carry 11 soldiers plus a driver and commander. Top speed was 42 miles per hour. It could even swim across rivers using its tracks for propulsion. The M113 went to Vietnam. American soldiers called it the battle taxi. More than 80,000 were built. They served in jungles, deserts, and cities. The design proved so successful that over 50 countries bought them. Some nations still use M113s today, more than 60 years after the first one was built. But the evolution did not stop there. Engineers learned from experience. They added more armor to protect against bigger weapons. They added guns so the vehicle could fight while moving. They improved the engines and suspension. In the 1980s, the American military introduced the Bradley fighting vehicle. It carried 7 soldiers. It had a 25mm cannon and anti-tank missiles. It could fight alongside tanks instead of just carrying troops near them. The Bradley weighed 27 tons. Its armor could stop heavy machine gun fire and some anti-tank weapons. Other countries developed their own versions. The British built the Warrior. The Germans made the Martyr. The Russians produced the BMP series. Each design was different, but all shared the same root idea. The idea that began in a French repair yard in 1944. Today, every major military in the world uses armored personnel carriers. The designs are sophisticated. They have computers and advanced armor. Some can survive mine blasts, others can drive themselves. But strip away the modern technology, and you find the same basic concept. Put soldiers inside armor. Protect them until they reach the fight. It seems obvious now. In 1944, it was revolutionary. Guy Simonds lived to see his innovation transform modern warfare. After the war, he continued to rise through military ranks. He became Chief of the General Staff, the highest position in the Canadian Army. He served from 1951 to 1955. During that time, he pushed for continued innovation. He believed armies that stopped adapting were armies that would lose the next war. Military historians studied his career. They noted that the Kangaroo was not his only innovation. He developed new tactics for night attacks. He pioneered the use of radar to guide artillery fire. He found ways to coordinate air power with ground forces. But the Kangaroo remained his most famous contribution. It was the clearest example of his approach to problems. When everyone said something could not be done, Simonds asked why not. When experts pointed to doctrine, Simonds pointed to results. He retired in 1955, but remained active in military education. He taught at staff colleges. He wrote about leadership and innovation. He emphasized one lesson above all others. The best solution to a problem is not always the most complex one. Sometimes the answer is simple. Sometimes it requires only seeing familiar things in a new way. Simonds died in 1974 at age 71. His obituaries mentioned many accomplishments. They listed battles won and positions held. But soldiers who served under him remembered something else. They remembered a general who cared more about saving lives than following rules. They remembered a leader who trusted his own judgment even when everyone disagreed. The broader lesson of the Kangaroo reaches beyond military history. It speaks to how innovation actually happens. We often think innovation means inventing something completely new. New technology, new materials, new designs. But some of the most important innovations come from rearranging what already exists. The Kangaroo did not use new armor. It did not need new engines. Every piece already existed. Simonds simply put them together in a way no one had considered. He asked, what if we stopped thinking about these vehicles as weapons and started thinking about them as transportation? That shift in thinking saved thousands of lives. This pattern appears throughout history. The shipping container revolutionized world trade. It was just a metal box. All the pieces existed before. Someone simply standardized the size and made it easy to move between ships, trains, and trucks. The personal computer used existing technology. Processors, memory, keyboards, and screens all existed in larger computers. Someone made them small and put them together for individual use. The smartphone combined a phone, camera, music player, and computer. None of those technologies were new. The innovation was combining them into one device people could carry everywhere. The Kangaroo fits this pattern perfectly. Old tanks plus new purpose equals revolutionary capability. Today's challenges often feel overwhelming. Climate change, disease, poverty, war. The problems seem too big. The solutions seem too expensive or too complex. But the Kangaroo teaches a different lesson. Sometimes the solution is not building something new. Sometimes it means looking at what we already have with fresh eyes. What resources are we calling worthless that might solve our biggest problems? What equipment are we using for one purpose that might serve another purpose better? What assumptions are we making that should be questioned? In modern warfare, the descendants of the Kangaroo roll across battlefields on every continent. Over 200 different variants exist. Some carry troops, others carry supplies or wounded soldiers. Some are fitted with medical equipment and serve as mobile hospitals. Others carry command centers or repair equipment. The basic chassis that began as a converted ram tank now serves dozens of purposes. Military analysts estimate that armored personnel carriers have saved hundreds of thousands of lives since World War II. Every soldier who rode to battle, protected instead of exposed. Every family that welcomed home a survivor instead of mourning a loss. All of it traces back to one moment in a French repair yard. Guy Simonds stood among vehicles everyone called scrap. He saw armor going to waste. He saw soldiers dying for lack of protection. He saw a solution so obvious. He wondered why no one had thought of it before. The answer is that they had not looked. They saw broken tanks. He saw broken thinking. They saw the end of useful life. He saw the beginning of something new. In the history of innovation, this moment stands as a reminder. The next great breakthrough might not require genius or huge resources. It might only require the courage to see familiar things differently and the determination to prove everyone else wrong. Sometimes the world does not need another invention. Sometimes it just needs someone brave enough to reimagine what already exists.